Thank you so much for taking the time, stopping in, and watching this video. You probably saw the length of this, and the whole reason I'm doing this is, yes, there are people out there that have done plenty of videos of how to play Warhammer 40k. And for me, I'm going to be doing some battle reports, and I'm planning on teaching a lot of friends how to play this game, so I'm hoping to use this as a jumping off point for a lot of newer players. If you're like me, your attention span is probably super low, and this is supposed to get all the information to you quickly so you can jump in and start playing your very first games. So rather than doing a 30-minute video or a 9-video playlist of how to play this game, I'm going to just do a short, sweet episode here for you that's going to go over all the basic rules. Because do you need the big honkin' $70 core rulebook? Probably not. I have it just for giggles, because I like it. Do you need to go through and download the Warhammer 40k 9th edition core rules? Yeah, it's a good thing to do. It's for free. Might as well go pick it up. But I went one step farther and I was like, how do I simplify this game even more? Because a lot of my board game friends, people that play Risk, play Clue, play, Monopoly and stuff like that, well, this is a war game. It's got a lot more going on. So I've actually condensed it down to a front and back of an index card. I'm going to teach you guys how to play Warhammer 40k the simple way. Now, what do we need to get together to start playing this game? Well, personally, I do think that you should have your core rules. Again, use the free download ones from Warhammer's community site. You look up free 9th edition core rules, download PDF. If it's from Warhammer community, you got it. And it'll teach you all the aspects in there, because I'm going over the simple stuff, but if you and your opponent want to be rules lawyers and be like, hey, this is how it's supposed to go, use that and fill it out there. Otherwise, roll off and just kind of go on that side. Next to that, you need to also have your models. You have your miniatures, the things that you painted and built and had so much fun putting together. Hopefully, you're going to need these to make sure that you can actually win the battles. Play tactically, capture the objectives, shoot people. You're going to want to make sure you have those on hand. You're also going to have the rules for your miniatures, and you can download these things from Battlescribe or Wahapedia, or you can also get them from Games Workshop directly from the Warhammer 40k app, which you could download for free, but you have to pay a subscription to actually get access to the data sheet, so pick your poison there. Or otherwise, you can go pick up the codex for your army. Me personally, whenever I was first getting started, and what I recommend all of you guys do, is you go and you look at your instruction booklet, because usually, like this is the most recent one I have for the Invictor Tactical Warsuit, the big old mech looking dude here. This teaches you how to build your model, but on the back here, it tells you how to play your model. And it even says on the disclaimer here, these are the essential rules to get your model onto the tabletop and be able to start battling with them right away. These are not the full rules. If you want more, go get the codex, yada, yada, yada. That's totally fine. I recommend you do that. The one thing to be careful of is, yes, you can pick up those instruction booklets, but sometimes you might get one from an older edition. These eliminators, the other sniper dudes, these are the heavy sniper, can take out tanks, can take out characters or whoever they want. Really fun unit. It gives you the instructions on how to build them, but I bought these back in 8th edition whenever I was first getting started with Warhammer. And unfortunately, with the new codex and the new rules, the new edition, their rules aren't the same. They actually have a different ballistic skill now, and they also don't have some of these special rules that are listed within their data sheet. So you do need to be careful that if you're using some of these, double check to make sure they're right, or otherwise you might have a bad time. But if you're getting started and you're playing casual with your friends, you're not want to go on different websites and stuff to download your stuff, that's fine. Use whatever you have. Just be careful that if you're going to a local gaming store or playing with other people competitively, that you have the right stuff. Otherwise, they might throw a hissy fit. On top of that, make sure you have 6-sided die. I recommend having as many as you can. The more you have, the better off it is. But honestly, if you get a few and you just have it from one of your other board games, go ahead and do that. The other thing too is tape measure. You're going to need these. So tape measure your distances for shooting, moving, all the rest of that jazz. Die, doing all the actual stats and the rolling and the shooting and fighting for the game itself. And so, yeah, that's what you need to have. I mean, of course, you're going to need a tabletop to play on. You might want to have some terrain as well, too, but there's nothing wrong with you using books or using, different just boxes and stuff like that. You don't need the official Games Workshop terrain. You don't even need to make your own pieces of terrain like I've done. You can just simply go through and use whatever you happen to have on hand that blocks line of sight. looking to scout out the area. The Intercessor Sergeant will be looking for cult activity and be going up against this small group of Chaos Cultists. Your very first phase, you start off as a command phase. You gain command points for your Battleforged army, activate abilities, and you gain victory points for your mission objectives, provided you actually control them. You control mission objective by having the most models within 3 inches of the objective itself. So in this example, the Space Marine is definitely outnumbered. The next phase available to us is the movement phase. You can choose to remain stationary or stay put, do a normal move, which is your M characteristic, advance, which is M plus a D6, or fall back. The first example we're going to use here, the Space Marine wants to try and capture the objective. So we'll utilize the normal move, which is just using the M characteristic, which is 6 inches for the Space Marine Sergeant. Measure from the front of the base here, all the way to the front of the base of the tape measure there. Now my Sergeant didn't like being out in the open, so he's going to choose to advance, where I roll 1d6 and then add that to my move characteristic. So in this example, I'll be able to move up to 12 inches, which will definitely get me within cover and still be close to that objective. One big caveat with moving is you're not allowed to move within 1 inch of the enemy. We call this engagement range, and it's reserved for the charge phase. Now typically, whenever you are in engagement range or within 1 inch, you are not allowed to shoot with your weapons normally, so you may want to try and move a model away to get a better shot on it. You can choose to fall back by using your M characteristic. Just know that any model that falls back cannot shoot or charge. Next up is the Psychic phase. If you control a Psyker, you can attempt to cast a Psychic power. To manifest it, you roll 2d6, and if the result is equal to or greater than the warp charge value, it succeeds. Now in our example here, our Librarian is casting Smite, which has a warp charge value of 5. We were successful with this, so now we roll a d6, and we divide that by 2, rounded up, which is a d3. We'll deal that many mortal wounds to the enemy. And mortal wounds are like wounds, but they normally cannot be saved. Now you're going to want to avoid doing double 6s or double 1s on your rolls, otherwise you cause perils of the warp, which makes it so your power does not succeed and instead usually kills your Psyker and others around. If the enemy has a Psyker, they can choose to deny the witch if they're within 24 inches. They roll off, and if they get higher, they deny your power. Next up is the shooting phase. This is more common here, but usually you target your enemy within range, roll to see if you hit, see if you wound, see if the opponent saves, and then you apply damage as necessary. What you'll do is you actually review your weapon's profile to determine if the weapon is within range. So you take a look at the range of whatever you're using, and then you actually use the type to see how many dice you're going to roll. You then roll off the dice to see if you hit by utilizing your ballistic skill. If it's successful, you move on to the wound roll, which is where you take your weapon's strength versus the enemy's toughness. Now here's a nice little chart that you can find in the core rules that tells you what you need. You roll off any successful hits to see if they wound, and in this case they do. Now your opponent has the opportunity to see if their armor will save them from the damage being dealt. In this case, the Chaos Cultist has a 6-up save, meaning that dice roll of 6 will save them, but the 4 will not, making them lose a model. Now if you take a look again at the characteristic though of the weapon we're using, it has an AP characteristic of a -1, which reduces the save roll. So that 6 will become a 5, and we lose another Chaos Cultist model. Next up is time for my Space Marine to charge the opponent. What you do is you measure the distance between the charging unit and the potential victim. You're going to roll 2d6, and if the result exceeds or meets, you'll actually get to move within 1 inch, which is what we call engagement range, again, as you talked about earlier. Now here's my 2 dice, and unfortunately the angle's kind of bad, but I need to get a 6 or better in order to get within 1 inch. Fortunately, my roll went pretty well, and I was able to move my model within the 1 inch engagement range and start to do some combat with the guys. Now, we are playing a dice game, so if you happen to be in a spot where maybe you're not going to succeed in your charge roll, we'll show you what happens. So in this case, let's just say I got a 1. I'm going to roll off and then see if I'm able to get within the 6 inches. Nope, snake eyes. So I fail a charge, I do not move my model. Now let's just say the first attempt was okay, the fight phase is where we're at. I got within engagement range, which is that 1 inch, and we're going to fight the opponent by using our weapon skill. We'll take a look at the attack characteristic first on the datasheet of my model, which says I have 3 attacks for this specific Intercessor Sergeant. I also have the Astartes Chainsword, which I'm using as my weapon, which gives me an additional attack, giving you 4 dice to roll. So this little bad boy makes combat so much better. I'm then going to use 4 dice to roll to see if I actually hit using my weapon skill. Now, I have to have a 3 or a better for weapon skill, and so with the dice that I did roll, I only had 2 successful hits. Now what I'll do is I'll remove the hits that were not successful, taking them off the table, and now it's time to see if I'm able to actually wound my opponent. Just like the shooting phase, what we're going to do is we're going to take our dice that were successful hits, and we're going to take a look at the wound roll table. Now, looking at this case, my Space Marine has a strength of 4, and my cultists have a toughness of 3. So therefore I need a 3 or better in order to wound my opponent. I'm going to roll my dice off. The other one was kind of off camera, so I'm going to re-roll that one there. And in this case, I got 2 successful hits and 2 successful wounds. Now, just like in the shooting phase, the opponent will have an opportunity to try and save. Again, they have a 6-up characteristic, and they fail their save, making my 1 damage for my weapon go through and kill 2 different models. Now the fight phase is cool because the opponent then has the opportunity to try and crack back with their melee weapons. In this case, the cultists try to see if they hit, and with their melee weapons, they do not. Finally, we have the morale phase. Each unit that lost models performs a morale test. You roll a d6 plus the models that were lost in the unit. If that result exceeds the leadership, then you're going to lose another model and start combat attrition. The Chaos Cultists have a leadership of 5, so with their 3 models that they lost, plus that 4 that we have here, you'll notice that, hey, I've got a 7 on the check, therefore it exceeds the leadership, so I'm about to lose another guy. Now I have one cultist here that may be impressionable. He may want to try and run away from battle, so I do a combat attrition test. After the fail, roll a d6 for each remaining model. Each result of 1, another 1 flees. If the unit's below half strength or half of their starting, a 1 or a 2 will make them flee. And in a single turn, the Space Marine Intercessor Sergeant did a pretty good job at taking down the cultists. The way the game works, though, is that after you're done taking your full turn, it's now your opponent's turn. So we're going to take it over and we're going to show you some of the advanced rules to kind of give you an understanding of some of the more detailed parts of the core rules. Now, typically when you're playing the game, you're not playing a game with just a singular model around the battlefield, but you're actually playing with units. Because this is a war game, you have squads of multiple models, which we call units, that you move across the battlefield, and they have to stay in what we call unit coherency, just to make sure that you understand who all is with who. What you do is you take the front model that you're wanting to move, and you're going to measure out their movement distance. Like the cultists, they can move up to 6 inches here. Measure from the front, you're going to move that model up here to the front, and then you're going to go and move all the rest of the cultists to match pace with this cultist that ran out forward. And with that, these cultists came out of the slums just to go control that objective. Staying within the realm of the movement phase, we're going to talk about the reinforcement step. After you have moved all your models, you are allowed to take some of the models that you had deployed elsewhere on the battlefield or off of the battlefield and deploy them onto the battlefield. Typically, that requires you to deploy 9 inches away from enemy models, so my sergeant here has called in a group of Inceptors who have the Death from Above ability. With that, I'm going to deploy them onto the battlefield, and that will act as them moving for this phase, and also allow you to essentially set your models up without them having the risk of getting shot off the board before you even got started. Now, another rule for characters like this librarian here is Look Out, Sir. Now, this allows you that as long as you are within 3 inches of another unit, and you are not the closest visible target for the enemies, they cannot target your character specifically, like this example. Now, in this one, you are definitely 3 inches away from your unit, you can be targeted. And in this one, you're the closest model, so you can be targeted too. So unless you want to cause unnecessary death, try to make sure your characters are staying behind your other units. Now, the next rule, Big Guns Never Tire, applies specifically to your monsters and vehicles. Usually, if you're tied up in combat where you're in engagement range with the enemy, you can't shoot. But with this, with any non-blast weapon, you can. You just have to subtract 1 from your hit roll. And with that, that's the basics of Warhammer 40k.